What if I told you that the ancient world was far more connected than we ever imagined? Long before the Silk Road carved its path across Asia, before European ships crossed oceans in search of spices and silk, there were thriving civilizations, 25 of them, in fact, that built trade networks stretching across continents, linking cultures thousands of miles apart. These weren't just simple exchanges of goods. They were the lifeblood of empires, the invisible threads that wove together languages, technologies, and even religions. And yet today, many of these civilizations have vanished, their stories buried under centuries of sand or swallowed by relentless jungles, but their legacies. They're still with us, hidden in the artifacts they left behind, the routes they forged, and the mysteries that continue to puzzle historians. Think about the last time you held something made far from home, a piece of clothing, a spice, even the phone in your hand. That simple act connects you to a tradition as old as human civilization itself, the irresistible urge to trade, to explore, to reach beyond the horizon. Now picture a world without maps, without satellites, where traders set sail or marched into the unknown armed only with stories and stars to guide them. That was the reality for these lost societies. They didn't just move goods, they moved ideas. They built ports where languages collided, marketplaces where cultures blended, and roads that carried more than just merchandise, they carried the future. This is the untold story of how trade reshaped our world long before modern globalization. From the seafaring masters of the Mediterranean to the desert caravans that crossed unforgiving wastelands, these civilizations didn't just participate in trade, they invented it. They turned remote outposts into bustling hubs, devised systems of currency and credit, and even faced challenges we'd recognize today: tariffs, smuggling, and the delicate dance of diplomacy. But perhaps most astonishing of all is how they vanished, leaving behind clues that hint at their greatness and their downfall. So join me as we peel back the layers of time, retracing the steps of merchants, explorers, and kings whose names history nearly forgot. By the end of this journey, you'll never look at the ancient world or the connections that bind us the same way again. One of the most fascinating things about these ancient trade networks is how they defied the limitations of their time. Picture this: traders navigating the vast emptiness of the Sahara without compasses or maps, their camels laden with gold and salt, or sailors braving the monsoon winds of the Indian Ocean, their ships packed with cinnamon and pearls bound for distant ports. These weren't just random journeys, they were carefully orchestrated systems, built on generations of knowledge passed down through families and guilds. Take the Phoenicians, for example. These seafaring innovators from the Eastern Mediterranean didn't just trade goods, they traded the very idea of trade itself, establishing colonies and outposts that became the backbone of commerce across 3 continents. But it wasn't just about moving goods from one place to another. These networks were the original internet, a sprawling web of connections that transmitted ideas as fast as they did spices. When a Mesopotamian merchant traded lapis lazuli from Afghanistan, they weren't just exchanging a blue stone for silver. They were sharing artistic techniques, religious symbols, even medical knowledge. The same happened along the Olmec trade routes in Mesoamerica, where jade carvings carried not just wealth but cultural identity across hundreds of miles. And let's not forget the Indus Valley civilization, whose standardized weights and measures suggest a level of commercial sophistication that wouldn't be seen again for millennia. Geography should have stopped them. Deserts, mountains, and oceans divided these civilizations, yet they found ways to bridge the gaps. The Nabateans carved entire cities like Petra into cliffs, turning a barren landscape into a crossroads for Arabian incense and Mediterranean olive oil. In West Africa, the Garamantes dug tunnels deep into the Sahara to reach underground water, sustaining trade routes where no one else dared to go. And in Southeast Asia, the Srivijaya Empire mastered the art of controlling strategic straits, taxing ships that carried everything from Chinese porcelain to Middle Eastern glassware. So what caused these networks to vanish? Sometimes it was nature shifting rivers, droughts, or volcanic eruptions that choked off vital routes. Other times it was human ambition as empires rose and fell, rewriting the rules of commerce. But perhaps the most surprising lesson is how much these ancient systems mirror our own world. They dealt with tariffs, counterfeit goods, even trade wars. They struggled with supply chains and the delicate balance of supply and demand. The difference, they did it all without a single spreadsheet or GPS. And that's what makes their story so extraordinary, not just what they traded, but how they changed the world by daring to connect it. Long before Bahrain became known for its modern skyscrapers and pearl divers, the islands thrived as the heart of the mysterious Dilmun Empire, a civilization so wealthy and influential that ancient scribes described it as a paradise where death held no power. Imagine a bustling harbor 3,000 years ago, where ships from Mesopotamia unloaded barley and textiles in exchange for gleaming copper from Oman, lustrous pearls from the Gulf, and rare timbers from distant India. Dilmun wasn't just a stop along the way. It was the grand marketplace of the Bronze Age, a place where traders haggled under the shade of palm groves and scribes recorded transactions on clay tablets with meticulous precision. What made Dilmun extraordinary wasn't just its goods, but its genius for connection. Like a spider at the center of a vast web, it linked two of history's earliest superpowers, the Indus Valley, with its meticulously planned cities, and Mesopotamia, the land of ziggurats and epic poetry. Archaeologists digging beneath Bahrain's sands have uncovered sprawling dockyards capable of harboring hundreds of ships, along with vast storerooms stacked with goods from half a dozen civilizations. But perhaps the most telling clue lies in the seal's tiny engraved stones used to mark shipments. These artifacts, found as far away as modern-day Iraq and Pakistan, tell a story of a trade network so efficient it would put modern logistics companies to shame. Yet for all its prosperity, Dilmun's downfall remains one of antiquity's great puzzles. By the time Persian empires rose to power, this once thriving hub had faded into obscurity. Some scholars point to climate shifts that turned fertile land to salt flats, while others blame the collapse of its trading partners like dominoes when the Indus Valley declined. Dilmun's fortunes may have crumbled with it. There's even evidence of earthquakes that shattered its vital freshwater springs, the lifeblood of its economy. But here's the twist: Dilmun never truly disappeared. Its legacy lived on in the techniques of pearl diving that sustained Gulf economies for centuries, and in the trade routes later empires would follow. Even the tales of its immortality, whispered by Sumerian poets, might hold a kernel of truth after all. Isn't a civilization immortal when its ideas outlast its temples? The story of Dilmun forces us to rethink what makes a civilization lost. Its cities might lie buried, but its innovations, standardized weights, maritime insurance, even the concept of a neutral trading port echo through history. Every time a modern cargo ship passes through the Gulf, it sails in the wake of merchants who turned this corner of the world into a crossroads of continents. And that's the real mystery, not why Dilmun fell, but how something so vital could be forgotten for so long. While Dilmun's merchants thrived in the sun-baked Gulf, another civilization was mastering the waves far to the west, one that would redefine what trade could be. The Minones of Crete didn't just sail the Mediterranean, they commanded it, transforming the sea from a barrier into a highway. Picture their sleek, colorful ships, their hulls packed with saffron so precious it was worth its weight in gold, with olive oil in gleaming clay jars, and pottery so finely crafted it became the must-have luxury item from the palaces of Egypt to the shores of Sardinia. This wasn't trade as usual, it was something revolutionary. The Minones didn't wait for goods to come to them. They built Europe's first thalassocracy, a maritime empire where control of the waves meant control of wealth itself. What set them apart wasn't just their goods, but their genius for connection. Their frescoes, vibrant, sunlit masterpieces preserved by time, show a world alive with movement, sailors unloading cargo, diplomats exchanging gifts, artisans adapting foreign styles into something entirely new. And then there's Linear A, their mysterious script etched into clay tablets. Was it invoices, treaties, inventories? We still don't know, but its very existence hints at a system so sophisticated it could track goods across thousands of miles. Imagine the organizational brilliance required to manage a network stretching from the Nile Delta to the Italian peninsula, all without maps or radios. But the Minones' greatest legacy might be their fragility. When the volcano on Thera erupted around 1600 BC, it didn't just bury a city, it shattered an entire way of life. Tsunamis crushed coastal hubs, ash blotted out the sun, and within generations the Mycenaeans, their warlike neighbors, filled the void. Yet here's the haunting question: what if Thera had stayed silent? Would we have seen a Mediterranean united by trade rather than divided by conquest? The Minones showed the world how culture could spread not by the sword, but by the sail. Their collapse didn't just end an empire. It might have altered the very course of European history, steering it away from commerce and toward conflict. Even in their absence, their influence lingered. Mycenaean rulers copied their art, their architecture, even their bureaucracy. The love of olive oil and wine they popularized became staples across the ancient world. And perhaps most tellingly, their ship designs, those lean, fast vessels, became the blueprint for every great trading power that followed. The Minones proved that trade wasn't just about wealth, it was about ideas. And though their script remains unread and their palaces lie in ruins, their real lesson echoes across millennia. Civilization doesn't just rise and fall, it ripples long after the last ship has sailed. High in the arid river valleys of Peru, where the desert meets the sea, the Norte Chico civilization quietly rewrote the rules of ancient commerce without so much as a single sword or clay pot to their name. While other cultures were erecting pyramids or forging weapons, these enigmatic people were weaving cotton into the very fabric of South America's first trade network. Picture this: around 3,000 years before the Common Era, while Egypt's pharaohs were still centuries from power, Norte Chico's leaders were orchestrating an economic revolution. Farmers grew vast fields of fluffy white cotton in sun-baked valleys, while coastal communities harvested anchovies by the millions. The exchange was simple but revolutionary: textiles for protein, creating a symbiotic relationship that spanned dozens of settlements across nearly 25 miles. What makes Norte Chico extraordinary isn't what they built, but what they didn't. No fortresses, no golden idols, not even basic pottery, which most contemporary cultures considered essential. Instead, they invested in something far more enduring: relationships. Archaeologists have uncovered evidence of shared plazas and communal feasting areas, suggesting trade wasn't just transactional here, it was social glue. The cotton they traded wasn't merely cloth, it became fishing nets for coastal villages, enabling catches so abundant they could sustain entire cities. In return, the protein-rich fish allowed inland populations to flourish where crops alone might have failed. This wasn't just barter, it was early economic interdependence on a scale unseen elsewhere in the ancient world. Yet the real mystery lies in their legacy. Unlike the Inca, who would later dominate the region with stone highways and terraced cities, Norte Chico left almost no physical trace beyond a few circular plazas and the occasional stone tool. Some scholars argue their invisibility was deliberate, a culture that valued reciprocity over accumulation, where wealth wasn't hoarded but circulated. Their influence, however, echoes through time. The same trade routes they pioneered would later become the backbone of the Inca Empire's famed road system. The cotton-growing techniques they perfected still shape Peruvian agriculture today. Even their penchant for collective decision-making finds parallels in Andean communities millennia later. So why did such a sophisticated network vanish so completely? Climate holds part of the answer. Shifting El Niño patterns may have disrupted the delicate balance between coast and valley. But perhaps their greatest strength also sealed their fate. A society built on trust and mutual need leaves little to excavate when it fades. No grand tombs to loot, no citadels to conquer, just the quiet understanding that civilization isn't about monuments but connections. In the end, Norte Chico's most enduring trade wasn't cotton or fish, but an idea that prosperity flows not from what you take, but from what you share. Towering stone obelisks, some as tall as 10-story buildings, pierced the sky above the highlands of Ethiopia, silent sentinels of a kingdom that once commanded trade routes stretching from Rome to India. This was Axum, Africa's forgotten superpower, where camel caravans heavy with ivory and gold converged at a port so bustling, Roman geographers called it the marketplace of the world. While Europe descended into the Dark Ages, Axum's merchants were perfecting something revolutionary, their own currency. Imagine a Roman trader's surprise when handed a gold coin stamped not with Caesar's face, but that of King Azona. Proof that this wasn't some backwater kingdom, but a peer of empires. The secret to Axum's dominance lay in its geography. Perched nearly 2,000 meters above sea level, its capital enjoyed cool climates ideal for agriculture, while its Red Sea port of Adulis became the revolving door between continents. Ships from India docked beside Egyptian grain freighters, their holds exchanging spices for glassware, while Axumite middlemen grew fabulously wealthy, taxing every transaction. But this wasn't just about wealth, it was about vision. While others hoarded gold, Axum invested in infrastructure, roads, reservoirs, and those iconic obelisks that served less as monuments than as billboards proclaiming to every passing trader, "This is where power lies." Yet Axum's true genius was cultural. Walk through Adulis at its height, and you'd hear Greek haggling with Hindi, see Jewish merchants trading alongside Christians freshly converted by Syrian missionaries. The kingdom became a blender of faiths and languages, adopting writing systems from South Arabia, while exporting its distinct architectural style as far as Yemen. Even its farming techniques, terracing steep hillsides to grow crops like teff, became gifts to the world. So what unraveled this powerhouse? The answers whisper from the landscape itself. Soil samples reveal a grim story, centuries of intensive farming and the insatiable demand for timber to build ships and homes stripped the highlands bare. As erosion choked rivers and harvests dwindled, Axum's lifeline, its agricultural surplus, vanished. Then came the final blow, the rise of Islamic caliphates, whose control of the Red Sea rerouted trade away from Christian Axum. Within centuries, the kingdom that minted coins bearing crosses saw its ports grow quiet, its obelisks toppled by earthquakes or neglect. But to focus only on Axum's fall is to miss its triumph. Long after its decline, Swahili traders along Africa's east coast still used Aksumite techniques in credit and navigation. The jade script birthed by its scribes remains Ethiopia's liturgical language today. And those coins, they've been found as far away as Sri Lanka, tiny, glittering proof that Africa's gateway to the East didn't just participate in global trade. For a glorious moment, it helped define it. The real question isn't whether Aksum could have rivaled Rome, but why we ever forgot it did. Deep in the rugged highlands of Anatolia, where the earth itself seemed to bleed metal, the Hittites forged an empire not just from conquest but from fire and innovation. Their mastery over iron wasn't just skill, it was alchemy. At a time when most civilizations prized bronze for weapons and tools, the Hittites unlocked the secrets of smelting iron ore at temperatures high enough to purge impurities, creating metal so strong it could slice through bronze like parchment. Imagine the shock of Egyptian pharaohs when they first encountered Hittite blades, weapons that didn't bend or shatter, but held their edge through battle after battle. This wasn't just trade, it was a technological revolution disguised as commerce. The Hittites didn't just hoard this knowledge, they weaponized it diplomatically. Their treaties with Egypt, etched in cuneiform on silver tablets, weren't merely peace accords, they were trade contracts stipulating the exchange of iron for Egyptian gold and grain. One particularly famous agreement, the Treaty of Kadesh, included clauses guaranteeing safe passage for merchants carrying iron ingots, history's first recorded trade protections. But the real genius lay in their control. By restricting iron smelting techniques to a select few fortress cities like Hattusa, they created a monopoly so tight that for centuries their clients had no choice but to return, deal after deal. Yet iron's story in the ancient world is also one of fragility. When the so-called Sea Peoples invaded around 1200 BCE, ravaging Hittite cities and severing trade routes, the knowledge of advanced ironworking didn't just fade, it vanished almost overnight. Archaeologists find evidence of this collapse in the layers of destruction. Furnaces abandoned mid-smelt, half-finished ingots buried under rubble. The consequences rippled across continents. Without Hittite iron, Egypt's new kingdom faltered, its military edge blunted. Greece plunged into a dark age where even basic metal tools became rare. For nearly 300 years, the Mediterranean world regressed technologically, forced to reinvent what the Hittites had perfected. What's often overlooked is how the Hittites' legacy endured in unexpected ways. Their scattered smiths likely seeded ironworking knowledge as far as India and Europe, where the techniques resurfaced centuries later. The very word iron may derive from the Hittite term isharu, hinting at linguistic echoes of their influence. And those treaties, they became the blueprint for later trade agreements, proving that commerce could be as binding as war. The Hittites remind us that trade isn't just about goods, it's about power, secrets, and the delicate threads of progress that can unravel in an instant. Their greatest lesson might be this: civilization advances not just by what it creates, but by what it manages not to lose. While continents were being connected by roads and caravans, the Lapita people were mastering a far more daunting frontier, the vast, trackless Pacific. Picture this, around 1500 years before the Common Era, when most cultures hesitated to lose sight of land, these intrepid explorers loaded their double-hulled canoes with potted plants, livestock, and bundles of obsidian, then set sail into the unknown. Their voyages weren't just short hops between visible shores. They were deliberate, audacious leaps across hundreds of miles of open ocean, navigating by stars, currents, and the flight patterns of birds. By the time Europeans were still clinging to their coastlines, the Lapita had already colonized islands scattered across an area larger than the continental United States, from New Guinea to Tonga. What's truly astonishing isn't just the distance they covered, but what they carried with them. Their signature pottery, decorated with intricate geometric patterns pressed into clay, became both a trade good and a cultural fingerprint. Archaeologists find shards of it on islands separated by treacherous waters, proof of a network that exchanged more than just resources. Obsidian from distant volcanoes, shells transformed into tools, even the very crops that would sustain future Polynesian societies, all moved along these routes. But the Lapita's greatest export wasn't material, it was knowledge. Every successful voyage added to their mental maps of currents and seasonal winds, creating a living library of navigation passed down through generations. Yet for all their achievements, the Lapita remain ghostly figures in the archaeological record. No grand temples, no written records, just those telltale pottery fragments and the silent evidence of their genes, which still thread through modern Polynesian populations. Their language, reconstructed by linguists, became the root of hundreds of Pacific tongues. But around 500 years after their expansion began, their trade networks mysteriously fractured. Some islands stopped producing pottery altogether, while others developed distinct styles. Was it climate shifts that altered wind patterns, overpopulation on fragile islands, or simply the natural consequence of distance as scattered communities grew self-sufficient? The Lapita's legacy, though, is anything but lost. Their voyages laid the groundwork for the Polynesian explorers who would later reach Hawaii, Easter Island, and even the shores of South America. Their celestial navigation techniques, perfected over millennia, were so precise that centuries later, European sailors with compasses and sextants still marveled at Pacific wayfinders who could detect unseen islands by reading ocean swells. In a way, the Lapita invented the original global network, one not of silk or spice, but of shared survival in Earth's most expansive wilderness. Their story whispers a timeless truth. Sometimes the most profound connections aren't marked by roads or ruins, but by the courage to sail beyond the horizon. Beneath the scorching sands of Central Asia lies the story of a civilization so crucial to the ancient world that its collapse may have sent shockwaves across continents, the Oxus, or Bactria Margiana archaeological complex. While Egypt built pyramids and Mesopotamia raised ziggurats, these master traders were quietly threading together the Bronze Age's most vital supply chains. Picture their oasis cities rising like mirages along the Amu Darya River, their mud brick walls studded with lapis lazuli from Afghanistan and tin from mines hundreds of miles away. These weren't just commodities, they were the lifeblood of empires. Without Oxus middlemen, Mesopotamian artisans couldn't craft their blue-glazed temples, and Anatolian smiths would lack the tin needed to alloy bronze. What set the Oxus apart wasn't just their goods, but their genius for survival in a landscape that defied civilization. Their cities like Gona de Pere, with its labyrinthine corridors and ceremonial fire temples, were fortresses as much as trading hubs. Watchtowers overlooked caravan routes, hinting at the constant threat of raiders. Yet inside those walls, artisans worked wonders. They transformed raw lapis into beads so uniform they functioned as early currency, while their metallurgists perfected tin ratios that made their bronze weapons the most coveted in Eurasia. Recent excavations reveal something even more startling. Oxus merchants may have pioneered early insurance systems, with clay tablets suggesting shared risk agreements for caravans braving the treacherous Hindu Kush passes. Then, around 1700 BC, the lights went out. Cities that had thrived for centuries were abandoned so abruptly that archaeologists find meals still in cooking pots. The leading theory, a perfect storm of disasters. Pollen samples show rivers drying up as climate shifted, while skeletal remains reveal signs of violent trauma. But the most telling clue lies in what happened next. From Mesopotamia to the Indus Valley, bronze suddenly became scarce. tin, that critical ingredient, vanished from markets. The Oxus hadn't just been traders, they'd been the linchpin holding together an entire technological era. Their disappearance didn't just end their own story. It may have helped plunge neighboring civilizations into their own dark ages. Yet traces of their legacy linger in unexpected places. The fire temples of later Zoroastrianism echo Oxus designs, suggesting religious ideas traveled along trade routes. Their lapis still adorns Tutankhamun's funeral mask, a glittering testament to connections spanning thousands of miles. Even their collapse holds a modern warning about supply chain fragility, about how interconnected our world has always been. The Oxus remind us that civilizations aren't isolated islands, but threads in a vast and delicate web, one that, when cut, can unravel in ways no ancient scribe could have foreseen. In the dense forests and savannas of what is now Nigeria, a civilization thrived with an artistic flair that still captivates the world, the Nok people. Between 500 years before the Common Era and 200 years after, while Rome was rising and the Maya were building their first cities, the Nok were crafting terracotta sculptures so lifelike, so expressive, that they seemed to whisper across the centuries. These weren't just figurines, they were a currency of culture, traded along routes that stretched across the Sahel, connecting West Africa to a web of exchange far more extensive than historians once believed. What makes the Nok extraordinary isn't just their art, but what it reveals about their society. Each sculpture, whether a bearded elder with piercing eyes or a dancer mid-movement, was fired at temperatures so high it required advanced kiln technology. But here's the twist, the Nok didn't stop at clay. They were also among sub-Saharan Africa's earliest ironworkers, producing tools and weapons that likely flowed along the same trade networks as their sculptures. Imagine a merchant caravan laden with both delicate figurines and sturdy iron hoes, one reflecting beauty, the other utility, a duality that hints at a society balancing artistry and industry. The reach of these goods tells a broader story. Nok terracottas have been found hundreds of miles from their homeland, while their iron tools bear chemical signatures linking them to distant ore sources. This suggests a trade network that may have linked the forests of West Africa to the edges of the Sahara, where salt and gold were already changing hands. Even more intriguing, the stylistic echoes of Nok art in later kingdoms like If and Benin, as if their aesthetic language became a silent thread tying generations together. Yet around 200 years into the Common Era, the Nok vanished. Their kilns cooled, their villages emptied, and their trade routes fell silent. The leading theory points to an environmental crisis. Centuries of intensive charcoal production for iron smelting may have deforested their homeland, triggering soil erosion and agricultural collapse. But there's another layer. As the Sahara dried, trade routes may have shifted northward, leaving the Nok economically isolated. It's a haunting reminder that even the most vibrant civilizations can be undone by the very innovations that fueled their success. The Nok's legacy, though, is anything but lost. Those terracottas didn't just influence later African art, they became a Rosetta Stone for understanding pre-colonial African trade. Their ironworking techniques likely seeded metallurgical traditions across the region, and their story challenges an old assumption that ancient Africa's connections were limited. The Nok prove otherwise. Their trade web was vast, their influence enduring. In the end, their sculptures weren't just art, they were messengers from a world far more connected than we ever imagined. Long before Persia's emperors ruled the ancient world, another civilization mastered the art of turning trade into power, the Elamites. Nestled in the rugged highlands of what's now southwestern Iran, they didn't just occupy a strategic location, they weaponized it. Picture Susa, their glittering capital, where merchants from Mesopotamia haggled over silver ingots with traders from the distant Indus Valley, while scribes recorded transactions in 3 languages: Elamite, Akkadian, and Sumerian. This wasn't just a city, it was a linguistic and cultural crossroads where goods, ideas, and even gods changed hands. What set the Elamites apart wasn't just their geographic luck, but their ruthless pragmatism. They controlled the only viable routes between the tin mines of Afghanistan and the cedar forests of Lebanon, taxing every caravan that passed. Their real innovation, though, was in the ledger books. Archaeologists have uncovered clay tablets detailing loans with interest rates, contracts for slave labor, even receipts for bulk timber shipments, evidence of a commercial system so advanced it rivaled Babylon's. And their most controversial trade, humans. Elamite texts mention captives from the Zagros Mountains sold to Mesopotamian cities, a grim reminder that ancient commerce wasn't always about spices and silk. Yet Susa's true power lay in its adaptability. When Sumer declined, the Elamites adopted cuneiform. When Assyria rose, they played rival empires against each other, surviving as middlemen even as overlords changed. Their artisans blended Mesopotamian motifs with distinct Elamite styles, creating artworks that fetched premium prices from Susa to Mohenjo-Daro, and their greatest export. Administrative know-how. The famed Achaemenid bureaucracy, with its satrapies and royal roads, borrowed heavily from Elamite models, proving that even conquered peoples can shape their conquerors. The end came brutally. Assyrian king Ashurbanipal, fed up with Elamite rebellions, razed Susa in 640 BC, boasting that he sowed salt in its earth. But here's the twist. The very trade networks the Elamites built became the backbone of Persia's empire. Had they resisted longer, history might have unfolded differently. No unified Persian roads, no Darius minting coins, perhaps even Alexander facing a fractured East. Their legacy whispers a provocative idea. Sometimes the greatest empires aren't those that endure, but those whose systems outlive them. The Elamites didn't just move goods, they moved history itself, vanishing so completely that we forget they paved the way for the world's first superpower. High in the Andes, where thin air makes every step a struggle, the Wari civilization accomplished something extraordinary. They turned mountains into highways. Centuries before the Inca became South America's most famous empire, these unsung architects of the Andes were busy weaving a trade network so vast it connected coastal deserts to cloud forests, all without the wheel or beasts of burden. Picture their couriers, clad in alpaca wool, sprinting along stone-paved roads at altitudes that leave modern hikers gasping, their knapsacks filled not with gold but something far more valuable: freeze-dried potatoes, hallucinogenic coca leaves, and maize so prized it was traded like currency. The Wari didn't just move goods, they moved the very idea of what a mountain empire could be. What set them apart wasn't just their roads, though those were marvels of engineering, cutting through cliffs with retaining walls and drainage systems that still function today, but their understanding of soft power. Instead of conquering neighbors outright, they built colonies like Pikilacta, vast administrative hubs stocked with identical standardized pottery and textiles. Archaeologists call it branding, a way to create cultural cohesion across hundreds of miles. Their traders carried more than merchandise, they carried a way of life, introducing terracing techniques that turned barren slopes into fertile fields and spreading religious iconography featuring the staff god, a deity later adopted by the Inca. Yet the Wari's most ingenious innovation lay in their storage. At sites like Cerro Ball, they constructed row upon row of circular granaries called kulkas, capable of preserving crops for years using ventilation and stone foundations. This wasn't just food security, it was economic strategy. By stockpiling surplus maize, they could stabilize prices across regions, prevent famines, and even loan provisions to allies. Imagine a Bronze Age version of modern commodity markets, where the real currency wasn't coins, but trust in a system that could feed you when drought struck. Then, around the year 1000, their carefully balanced world unraveled. Tree rings tell a grim story, decades of relentless drought that crippled agriculture. But climate alone doesn't explain why the wary abandoned cities so completely they left behind untouched storerooms. Some scholars point to internal revolt, perhaps outlying colonies, tired of sending tribute to the highland capital, simply walked away. Others suspect their rigid system couldn't adapt when crisis hit. Whatever the cause, their legacy lived on in the most unexpected way. When the Inca rose to power 4 centuries later, they didn't just reuse wary roads, they copied their administrative playbook from the Kulkas to the staff guard imagery. The haunting question isn't why the wary fell, but how history forgot them so thoroughly. Maybe it's because they left no written records, or because the Inca deliberately erased their predecessors' achievements. But stand on one of their ancient highways today, and you'll feel the truth beneath your feet. The stones still aligned, the grooves from millions of footsteps still visible. The wary didn't just build roads, they built the blueprint for an empire, proving that sometimes the most enduring civilizations aren't those that shout their names in stone, but those that whisper through the traditions of those who came after. Imagine an empire so powerful it commanded the narrowest choke point in global trade yet today. Its name is barely whispered outside history books. The Srivijaya kingdom didn't just dominate the Malacca Strait. They turned it into their personal toll booth, taxing every ship sailing between the 2 greatest economic powerhouses of the medieval world, China and India. For 6 centuries, from the 7th to the 13th, their invisible hand guided the flow of spices, silks, and ideas across half the planet. But here's the paradox: how does a civilization that once held the keys to the world's wealth vanish so completely that even its capital's location remains debated? The secret to Srivijaya's rise lay in geography's cruel joke. The strait they controlled was both a blessing and a curse, narrow enough to monitor every vessel, yet so prone to piracy that merchants had no choice but to pay for protection. Chinese records describe their ports as floating cities, where sailors from Arabia traded glassware for Sumatran camphor, while Javanese rice changed hands for Persian carpets. But Srivijaya's real genius was in what they did with that wealth. Instead of hoarding gold, they built something far more enduring: Buddhist universities that attracted scholars from as far as Tibet and Bengal. The great monk Yijing spent years studying Sanskrit here, later writing that Srivijaya's libraries rivaled Nalanda's. This wasn't just a trade hub, it was the Silicon Valley of its day, a place where commerce funded intellectual revolutions. Yet their success carried the seeds of downfall. Unlike stone monuments that withstand centuries, Srivijaya built almost entirely in wood and bamboo, materials that melted back into the jungle. Even their ships, the lifeblood of the empire, were designed to rot, lashed together with fibers instead of nails for easy repair. When rival kingdoms like the Chola of India or the emerging Javanese powers found alternate routes, bypassing Srivijaya's tolls, the empire's wealth evaporated like monsoon rain. By the time Marco Polo sailed through in the 13th century, he noted only a few wretched huts where palaces once stood. But to focus only on their disappearance is to miss their quiet triumph. Srivijaya's legacy lives on in the Malay language, which became the lingua franca of Southeast Asian trade precisely because of their influence. Their navigational charts, passed down through generations, later guided Portuguese explorers. Even their Buddhist networks laid groundwork for the Theravada traditions that now define Myanmar and Thailand. The real lesson of Srivijaya isn't about how empires fall, it's about how they endure in ways we least expect. Their greatest monument wasn't a temple or a statue, but an idea. That control of knowledge and trade routes could shape civilizations long after the last wooden pillar had turned to dust. Beneath the blistering sands of the Sahara, where temperatures soar high enough to melt stone, the Garamantes performed what might be ancient Africa's most audacious act of defiance. They turned a wasteland into a kingdom. While Roman historians dismissed them as mere bandits, these desert lords were actually engineering geniuses, carving 600 miles of underground tunnels through solid rock to tap into hidden aquifers. Picture their capital, Garama, rising like a mirage from the dunes, its streets shaded by date palms fed by an invisible lattice of fagaras, those ingenious channels that siphoned water from deep beneath the earth. This wasn't just survival, it was hydrological alchemy, transforming the world's most unforgiving desert into a bustling hub for salt, ivory, and slaves moving between sub-Saharan Africa and the Mediterranean. What made the Garamantes extraordinary wasn't just their water systems, but their role as cultural middlemen. Their caravans guided by stars and sandstone cairns connected worlds that barely knew each other existed. Berber merchants from the north traded bronze tools for gold dust mined by kingdoms along the Niger River, while Garamante middlemen grew rich on the markup. Archaeologists have found Roman glassware in their ruins, alongside beads from India and cowrie shells from the Atlantic, evidence of a network stretching thousands of miles. Even their enemies couldn't ignore their influence. Roman Emperor Septimius Severus, frustrated by their control of trade routes, launched a costly campaign just to seize a single Garamonte oasis and still failed to break their monopoly. Yet the very ingenuity that built their empire may have doomed it. Those fagaras, while revolutionary, drained aquifers faster than nature could replenish them. By the 7th century, as the Sahara grew even drier, the tunnels began coughing up dust instead of water. Cities that once hosted thousands were abandoned so thoroughly that later Arab geographers assumed the Garamantes had been mythical. But here's the haunting question modern hydrologists ponder. Could they have survived with today's knowledge? Their fagaras weren't so different from Qatar's modern underground irrigation systems or Israel's drip agriculture, proof that their ideas were centuries ahead of their time. The Garamantes' legacy lingers in unexpected ways. Their trade routes became the backbone of the trans-Saharan networks that later fueled the Mali Empire's gold trade. Even their fagara technology was rediscovered by medieval Moroccan engineers and survives today in Oman's Aflaj channels. Their real lesson isn't about failure, but foresight, how a civilization can flourish against impossible odds, only to falter when it mistakes temporary abundance for eternal security. They remind us that the deserts of history bury not just cities but warnings about sustainability, about hubris, and about the delicate balance between conquering nature and cooperating with it. Deep in the emerald heart of Cambodia, where strangler figs slither over crumbling stone, the Khmer Empire built not just a city, but an entire hydrological miracle, Angkor, a metropolis fed by canals so precise they functioned like the arteries of a living organism. While medieval Europe struggled with muddy village roads, Khmer engineers were sculpting a labyrinth of reservoirs, moats, and irrigation channels that turned monsoon downpours into a year-round rice surplus. This wasn't just farming, it was economic alchemy, transforming water into grain, grain into trade, and trade into an empire that dominated Southeast Asia for 6 centuries. Picture the Tonle Sap Lake swelling with seasonal floods, its waters diverted through Angkor's engineered veins to feed paddies that could yield 3 harvests annually, a feat unmatched until modern agribusiness. The genius of Khmer trade lay in what they didn't export. While neighbors shipped spices and silks, Anka's real power was its rice, so abundant it became the region's de facto currency. Chinese chronicles describe fleets of junks carrying Khmer grain to feed Java's cities, while inscriptions boast of warehouses stockpiling enough surplus to withstand years of drought. But their masterstroke was the hydraulic grid itself. Recent LiDAR scans reveal a system stretching far beyond Anka's temples. Canals aligned to celestial events, reservoirs positioned to capture every drop of seasonal rain. This wasn't just infrastructure, it was a cosmological blueprint, blending engineering with spiritual belief that water was the blood of the gods. Yet Anka's greatest strength hid its fatal flaw. That same reliance on monsoons, so predictable for centuries, became its undoing when climate patterns shifted. Tree rings tell a grim story. Decades of erratic rainfall in the 14th century, followed by catastrophic droughts. Reservoirs silted up, rice yields plummeted, and the empire's lifeblood slowed to a trickle. But here's the twist, it wasn't just nature. Archaeologists now suspect the Khmer compounded the crisis by overextending their water network, felling forests to expand paddies until the land could no longer sustain the grand design. The parallels to modern supply chains are eerie. Over-optimization creating fragility, centralized systems vulnerable to single points of failure. What survives today isn't just stone. Khmer water management techniques still shape Cambodian farming, from the ancient Marrae reservoirs now used for fish farming to the timed flood release methods adopted by modern rice cooperatives. Even Anka's collapse holds lessons about diversifying resources, about listening to environmental warnings, about how even the mightiest civilizations are just one drought away from reinvention. The jungle may have reclaimed their cities, but the Khmer's real legacy flows on, quiet as monsoon rain soaking into thirsty earth. In the sweltering lowlands of what is now Mexico, where jaguars slink through mangrove forests and rivers carve paths through volcanic rock, the Olmec built a civilization so foundational that scholars call them Mesoamerica's mother culture. Long before the Maya erected their pyramids or the Aztecs founded Tenochtitlan, these enigmatic people were busy inventing the rules of the game, trade included. Picture their great ceremonial centers like La Venta, where jade so luminous it seemed to glow from within changed hands alongside slabs of rubber harvested from sacred sapodilla trees. This wasn't just commerce, it was alchemy, turning raw materials into political power and spiritual currency. What set the Olmec apart wasn't just what they traded, but how they transformed it. Their artisans carved jade into jaguar figurines, half human, half beast. That became coveted status symbols across the region. And that rubber, they didn't just export it, they invented the ball game, turning latex into bouncing spheres for a ritual sport that would echo through Maya and Aztec cultures for millennia. Even their most iconic artifacts, those colossal basalt heads weighing up to 20 tons, hint at a trade network of staggering scale. The stone itself came from mountains 50 miles away, transported without wheels or pack animals, likely rolled on logs by armies of laborers. Were these imposing visages portraits of kings, or perhaps merchant lords who controlled the flow of goods? We still don't know, and that mystery only deepens their allure. The Olmec's real legacy, though, lies in the invisible exports. Their glyphs may represent the earliest writing in the Americas, a system later refined by the Maya. Their calendar and astronomical knowledge seeded traditions that would flourish across Mesoamerica. Even their trade routes became templates for later empires, with cacao, obsidian, and feathers following paths first blazed by Olmec merchants. But their influence came at a cost. Recent geological studies reveal layers of volcanic ash at Olmec sites, suggesting eruptions disrupted agriculture and choked rivers vital for transport. By 400 years before the Common Era, their great cities were abandoned, their once bustling markets reclaimed by jungle. Yet to focus only on their disappearance is to miss their quiet triumph. Those rubber balls, they're still used in traditional ulama games today. The jade trade they pioneered became the lifeblood of Maya royalty. Even their barter systems using cacao beans as proto-currency anticipated practices that would endure for centuries. The Olmec remind us that the most enduring civilizations aren't always those that leave the grandest ruins, but those whose ideas seep so deeply into the cultural groundwater that they become invisible yet inescapable. Their greatest monument isn't stone, but the very blueprint of Mesoamerican civilization itself. Among the swirling dust of Central Asia's caravan routes, no civilization mastered the art of the deal quite like the Sogdians. These merchants from the Zarafshan Valley didn't just travel the Silk Road, they were the Silk Road, turning their homeland in modern Uzbekistan into the ultimate trading hub between China and Persia. Picture their bustling cities like Samarkand, where a single marketplace might host Tibetan musk, Byzantine gold coins, and stacks of paper fresh from Chinese workshops, all while polyglot Sogdian brokers negotiated deals in a dozen languages. Their secret wasn't just what they sold, but how they sold it. While others feared the treacherous Pamir Mountains, the Sogdians saw opportunity, establishing way stations where exhausted travelers could swap foundering camels for fresh ones, for a hefty fee, of course. What set them apart was their cultural chameleonism. A Sogdian merchant in Chang'an might wear Chinese silk to court favor with imperial officials, then switch to Persian-style trousers before haggling with Turkic horse dealers. They didn't just adapt, they absorbed, blending Zoroastrian fire rituals with Buddhist art to create a hybrid faith that put clients at ease. Their contracts, written in a distinctive cursive script on paper or leather, included clauses we'd recognize today: interest payments, liability for damaged goods, even early forms of arbitration. Archaeologists have found fragments of these agreements from Dunhuang to the Caucasus, proof of a commercial network so vast it made the Silk Road feel small. Their most enduring export, though, was trust. In an era when most traders operated within tight ethnic circles, the Sogdians built something revolutionary: a multicultural trade diaspora. A Sogdian caravan might include Sogdian Buddhists, Nestorian Christians, and Manichaeans, all bound by a shared legal code and reputation for fairness. Chinese records praise their uncanny skill at assessing gem quality, while Persian poets joked that even the devil couldn't out-negotiate a Sogdian. This reputation allowed them to become the bankers of the ancient world, issuing letters of credit so reliable that a promissory note from Samarkand could be cashed in Baghdad or Xi'an. But their brilliance carried the seeds of downfall. As Arab armies swept east in the 8th century, the Sogdians' neutrality, once their greatest asset, left them vulnerable. Their capital, Panjshir, fell after a brutal siege, its vivid frescoes of feasting merchants scorched by invaders who saw their cosmopolitanism as a threat. Yet in a twist of irony, the conquerors adopted Sogdian administrative systems to run their own empires. Even more remarkably, Sogdian DNA surfaces in places as far-flung as Viking burial sites and Tang dynasty tombs, evidence of a network that outlasted its creators. The real lesson of the Sogdians isn't about caravans or contracts, it's about the power of connection. They proved that commerce isn't just about moving goods, but about building bridges between worlds. When a Sogdian trader taught a Chinese artisan to blow glass or convinced a nomadic chief to accept paper instead of silver, they weren't just making a sale, they were knitting together civilizations. Their legacy whispers a provocative idea. Sometimes the greatest empires aren't built on conquest, but on the quiet understanding that everyone, everywhere wants a good deal. High in the arid mesas of what's now the American Southwest, the ancestral Pueblones engineered a trade network as precise as it was improbable. Picture Choco Canyon at its zenith, a sprawling hub of sandstone palaces and celestial observatories, where turquoise mined from distant mountains was carved into intricate pendants, then exchanged for macaw feathers hauled thousands of miles from the jungles of Mexico. This wasn't just commerce, it was a defiance of geography, a web of roads radiating outward like spokes on a wheel, connecting over 70 pueblos across a landscape so harsh modern hikers still struggle to cross it. What made their system extraordinary wasn't just the goods, though the presence of scarlet macaws and seashells in this desert proves their reach, but the sheer audacity of their infrastructure. Those roads, some 30 feet wide and meticulously graded, weren't mere footpaths. They were engineered corridors, often running arrow straight for miles, cutting through solid rock where necessary. Recent LiDAR scans reveal something even more astonishing. These highways weren't built for efficiency. They ignored natural contours, suggesting their purpose was as much ceremonial as practical, a physical manifestation of cultural connections binding scattered communities. Yet the ancestral Pueblones' greatest innovation might have been their adaptability. In a land where rain was scarcer than gold, they perfected water catchment systems, channeling every precious drop into reservoirs and terraced fields. Their turquoise workshops, unearthed at Choco, reveal another layer of sophistication. Artisans imported raw stone from as far as Nevada, then exported finished jewelry to Mesoamerica, creating a feedback loop of wealth and influence. Imagine a trader from the Maya lowlands, marveling at Southwest designs while bartering feathers that would later adorn Chacon priests, a tangible thread linking civilizations separated by continents. Then, around the year 1150, the system collapsed. Great houses were abandoned mid-construction, kivas left empty, and roads swallowed by dust. The question of why still divides scholars. Tree rings tell part of the story, a 50-year mega-drought that crippled agriculture. But drought alone doesn't explain the violence hinted at in the archaeological record. Burned buildings, defensive walls, and skeletons with blunt force trauma. Some theorize that the very networks that sustained Choco became its undoing as outlying pueblos, tired of sending tribute to the canyon's elite, severed ties in a cascade of rebellions. Others point to the macaws, those dazzling status symbols whose care required vast resources, perhaps straining societies already on the edge. The haunting lesson of the ancestral Pueblones isn't just about fragility, but resilience. When Choco fell, its people didn't vanish, they migrated, carrying their knowledge to new communities like Mesa Verde and Bandelier. Their descendants, the modern Pueblo nations, still recount oral histories of the Great Drought, passing down warnings about imbalance and hubris. Those empty roads, now traced only by satellite imagery, whisper a truth we're grappling with today. That civilizations thrive not by conquering nature, but by listening to it. The ancestral Pueblones didn't just trade turquoise and feathers, they traded lessons in survival, written in the very stones they left behind. South of Egypt, where the Nile curves into a great bend before flowing toward the Mediterranean, the kingdom of Marrae rose from the sands with a power that should have rewritten history books, yet somehow didn't. While the world still marvels at Egypt's pyramids, Marrae's own iron smelting furnaces burned so fiercely they could be seen for miles, their glow a beacon of Africa's industrial might. This wasn't just another client state of the pharaohs, it was a civilization that turned the tables, supplying Rome itself with the two things empires crave most: weapons to conquer with and gold to pay for them. What made Marrae extraordinary wasn't just its resources, but the hands that wielded them. Its queens women with names like Amanianas and Amanishakito led armies against Roman legions, negotiated treaties as equals with Augustus, and built pyramids so steep they seemed to scrape the sky. One particularly audacious ruler even sent Caesar a bundle of golden arrows with a message. These could be weapons or gifts, choose wisely. Imagine Cleopatra's shock when her Roman allies took the Nubian queen's threat seriously. Yet for all their achievements, these women remain footnotes in a history dominated by their northern neighbors. The secret to Marrae's success lay beneath its soil. While Egypt relied on the Nile's predictable floods, Marrae's engineers tapped into something far more valuable: iron ore so pure it required less charcoal to smelt, allowing them to produce weapons at a scale that dwarfed competitors. Their gold mines, meanwhile, became the ATMs of the ancient world. Roman coins minted from Nubian bullion have been found as far away as India, proof of a trade network stretching thousands of miles. But here's the twist: Marrae didn't just export raw materials. Their artisans transformed iron into intricately patterned swords, their blades etched with crocodile motifs, a signature craftsmanship that made them status symbols from Carthage to Persia. Yet the very land that enriched Marrae ultimately betrayed it. As the Sahara inched southward, wells dried up and cattle herds dwindled. The kingdom's final death blow came not from Rome, but from an old trading partner turned rival, Axum. When the Ethiopian kingdom converted to Christianity, it cut off Marrae's access to Red Sea trade routes, isolating the ironworks and gold mines that had fueled its rise. By the time the first sandstorms buried Marrae's pyramids, the world had already turned away. Rome was too busy crumbling itself to notice. The real mystery isn't why Marrae fell, but why we forgot it. Perhaps it's because Victorian archaeologists obsessed with Egypt dismissed Nubia as a black imitation of its northern neighbor. Or maybe it's because history favors conquerors who write their own stories, not those who quietly supplied the tools of conquest. But stand in the shadow of Marrae's steep-sided pyramids today, and you'll feel the truth in the desert wind. This was no imitation. It was a civilization that mastered fire and diplomacy, whose queens outmaneuvered emperors, and whose gold built empires they never got credit for. Their legacy isn't just in the iron that shaped the ancient world, it's in the uncomfortable question they force us to ask: how many other Africas have we erased? Along the fertile floodplains of the Indus River, a civilization thrived with such quiet sophistication that modern archaeologists are still piecing together the full scope of their brilliance. The Harappans didn't just build cities, they engineered them with grid-patterned streets, advanced drainage systems, and communal baths that wouldn't look out of place in a modern metropolis. Picture the docks of Lothal, their meticulously designed port where ships laden with cotton and carnelian beads set sail for Mesopotamia, navigating tidal locks so precise they could adjust water levels like a Bronze Age Panama Canal. This wasn't just trade, it was logistical poetry, executed with a precision that rivals some of today's supply chains. What set the Harappans apart wasn't just their infrastructure, but their obsession with fairness. Dig up any Harappan marketplace from Mohenjo-Daro to Dolavira, and you'll find identical cubical stone weights no matter the city, no matter the era. A trader in Mesopotamia could trust that a Harappan measure of cotton would match exactly what was promised, a standardization so rigorous it suggests a centralized authority with remarkable control. Their seal carvings, intricate depictions of bulls, unicorns, and enigmatic script functioned like early barcodes, stamped onto bales of goods as both branding and quality assurance. Imagine a Sumerian merchant unrolling a bolt of Indus cotton, spotting that familiar unicorn emblem, and knowing instantly they'd gotten the real deal. Yet the most tantalizing mystery lies in their silence. Over 4,000 symbols grace their tablets and seals, but unlike Egyptian hieroglyphs or Mesopotamian cuneiform, Harappan script remains stubbornly undeciphered. Are these inventories, poetry, treaties without a Rosetta Stone equivalent? We're left guessing. Some scholars believe their writing wasn't just functional but multidimensional, possibly encoding different meanings depending on context, like an ancient emoji system. The few clues we have come from Mesopotamia, where scribes recorded shipments of meluhan, goods likely Harappan, mentioning everything from ivory combs to peacocks, hinting at a cultural exchange far richer than we've uncovered. Their disappearance is just as enigmatic as their script. Around 1900 BC, the cities began emptying. For decades, experts blamed Aryan invasions, but newer evidence paints a subtler tragedy. Sediment cores reveal that the mighty Saraswati River, once the lifeblood of their civilization, began shifting course due to tectonic activity, fracturing their agricultural heartland. Without water, the meticulously planned cities became ghosts. Yet here's the twist: the Harappans didn't vanish, they adapted. Recent excavations show their descendants migrating east, blending traditions with new communities. Their legacy lingers in modern Indian crafts, from cotton weaving to bead making, and perhaps even in the concept of weights and measures that later empires would adopt. The Harappans challenge everything we assume about ancient civilizations. They built no pyramids, erected no colossal statues, yet their influence rippled across continents. In a world obsessed with monuments, they left something far more enduring, a blueprint for how societies can thrive not through conquest, but through consistency, cooperation, and an unshakable commitment to fairness. Their greatest lesson might be this: sometimes the loudest legacies are the ones left in whispers. Long before Rome stamped its empire across the Mediterranean, another civilization held sway over the Italian peninsula, one with a flair for luxury, a genius for metallurgy, and a network of trade so vast it connected Celtic chieftains to Greek philosophers. The Etruscans didn't just inhabit the rolling hills of Tuscany. They transformed them into a powerhouse of commerce, where amphorae of prized wine changed hands for Baltic amber and Phoenician glass. Picture their coastal emporium of Spina, a Venice before Venice, where Greek merchants haggled over bronze mirrors etched with scenes of revelry, while Etruscan nobles lounged on couches imported from Egypt, sipping wine from gold-rimmed cups. This wasn't just trade, it was theater, a performance of wealth and influence that made Etruria the envy of the ancient world. What set the Etruscans apart wasn't just their goods, but their mastery of cultural fusion. Their alphabet, borrowed from the Greeks, became the blueprint for Latin script. Their artisans blended Egyptian motifs with Celtic patterns to create jewelry so distinctive it's still excavated from France to Turkey. Even their religious rituals, like reading omens in lightning strikes, were adopted by Rome's elite. But their real innovation lay beneath the soil. Vast mines in the Colline Metallifer Hills yielded copper, iron, and tin, which Etruscan smiths forged into weapons and tools traded as far as Britain. Imagine a Celtic warrior in Gaul, gripping an Etruscan-crafted sword, unaware that the same hands might have produced a ceremonial fan for an Egyptian priestess. Yet the Etruscans' greatest gift to history might be the very thing that erased them: their roads. Those winding, hill-cut paths that carried their wine and bronze later became the Via Aurelia and Via Cassia, Rome's imperial highways. Their ports, like Pyrgi, where temples once displayed gold tablets in both Etruscan and Phoenician, evolved into hubs of Roman commerce. Even their system of city-states, fiercely independent yet bound by shared culture, foreshadowed Italy's medieval commune. But this cultural osmosis came at a cost. As Rome grew stronger, it didn't just conquer Etruria, it absorbed it, repackaging Etruscan engineering, art, and religion as Roman innovations. By the time Augustus ruled, Etruscan had become a dying language spoken only in rural rituals. The haunting question isn't why the Etruscans faded, but how differently Europe might have developed if they'd outlasted Rome. Without their roads, would Roman legions have marched so efficiently? Without their metallurgy, would the empire have armed itself so effectively? And what of their society, one where women dined alongside men, owned property, and even inherited wealth, a stark contrast to Rome's patriarchal rigidity? Archaeologists still debate whether Rome's rise was a continuation of Etruscan influence or its erasure. Today, their legacy lingers in unexpected places. The arched gates of medieval cities owe their design to Etruscan models. The Tuscan vineyards that produce Chianti trace their roots to Etruscan viticulture. Even the word persona, derived from the Etruscan fursu, meaning mask, hints at their theatrical influence. The Etruscans didn't just vanish, they dissolved into the DNA of Western civilization. A reminder that sometimes the most enduring empires aren't those that dominate, but those that quietly shape what comes after. Their story isn't about loss, it's about transformation, an entire civilization that became the foundation for another, buried not under ruins, but under the weight of its own success. High in the mist-shrouded peaks of Colombia's Sierra Nevada, where jaguars still prowl through cloud forests, the Tarona built a civilization that turned gold into more than wealth. They wove it into the fabric of their world. Between 200 and 1600 years into the Common Era, while Europe stumbled through the Dark Ages, these master craftsmen and traders were busy forging a network that connected the emerald-rich highlands to the pearl-laden Caribbean coast. Picture their terraced cities like Ciudad Perdida, hidden among the peaks, where stone-paved pathways linked marketplaces buzzing with activity. Muisca traders from the interior brought raw emeralds the size of pigeon eggs, while coastal tribes offered rare shells and salt. But the real currency here wasn't just material, it was spiritual. To the Tarona, gold wasn't for hoarding. It was a bridge between worlds, hammered into pendants depicting jaguar gods and frog spirits, each piece a prayer made tangible. The genius of their trade lay in reciprocity. Unlike the Spanish, who would later ravage their lands, the Tarona saw exchange as sacred. A Muisca merchant might receive a gold figurine not just in return for emeralds, but as part of a ceremonial bond, a promise of future trade, sealed with coca leaves and shared rituals. Archaeologists have uncovered workshops where artisans alloyed gold with copper to create tumbaga, a shimmering metal that caught the light like liquid sun. These objects traveled far beyond the Sierra Nevada, reaching tribes as distant as the Quimbaya, proof of a network that thrived without maps or written contracts. The Tarona didn't just move goods, they moved meaning, embedding their cosmology into every traded item. Then came the thunder of hooves and harquebus fire. Spanish conquistadors, lured by tales of El Dorado, stormed the mountains in the 1500s. Their records describe towns where golden ornaments hung from doorways, where priests wore breastplates that gleamed like miniature suns. But the Tarona's greatest treasures weren't the ones melted into ingots, they were the stories etched into their metalwork, the oral histories that traced migration routes and sacred sites. One Spanish chronicler, perhaps unwittingly, captured the tragedy. They prized the making more than the metal. Within decades, slave raids and disease had shattered the trade networks that had sustained the highlands for over a millennium. Yet the Tarona never truly vanished. Their descendants, the Kogi people, still inhabit those misty peaks, guarding what they call the Elder Brothers' teachings. To them, the gold objects looted by the Spanish weren't just art, they were living entities, seeds holding the balance of the world. modern archaeologists working alongside Kogi elders have begun to piece together a fuller picture. A recently discovered workshop near Beretoka revealed molds used to cast jaguar pendants, alongside traces of coca residue, evidence that crafting and ritual were inseparable. Even more poignant are the Kogi's own trade practices today, still echoing ancient patterns, exchanging woven bags for salt from the lowlands, not just as commerce, but as an act of ecological reciprocity, maintaining the Great Mother's equilibrium. The real loss wasn't just the gold melted down for Spanish coinage, but the erasure of a world where trade was a dialogue with the divine. When a Tarona artisan shaped a golden bat, a creature they saw as a mediator between realms, they weren't just creating a commodity, they were encoding a cosmology. Those stolen objects now gathering dust in European museums are fragments of a shattered mirror, one that once reflected an entire way of understanding humanity's place in nature. The Kogi warn that the world grows sick when such balances are broken. In the end, the Tarona's legacy isn't just about what was taken, it's about what endures in the whispers of the mountain winds and in the hands of those who still remember how to listen. The grasslands of Central Asia stretch endlessly under a sky so vast it seems to swallow the horizon, a landscape where few civilizations dared to put down roots. But for the Khshung-Nu, the steppe wasn't just home, it was a highway. Mounted on hardy Mongolian horses, these nomadic warriors and traders built something unprecedented. A horseback empire that forced China's mighty Han dynasty to build its Great Wall not as a barrier, but as a desperate plea for peace. While history remembers the Silk Road as a Chinese invention, the truth is far more intriguing. Without the Khshung-Nu's relentless pressure, their raids, their demands for tribute, their insatiable appetite for silk, those fabled trade routes might never have stretched beyond the wall. What made the Khshung-Nu extraordinary wasn't just their military might, but their economic ingenuity. They didn't just steal Chinese silk, they turned it into currency, trading bolts of fabric for Siberian furs, Turkestani jade, and even Roman glassware that trickled across the steppe. Their confederation model, a loose alliance of tribes united under a single ruler or Chanyu, was a masterclass in flexibility. Unlike rigid agrarian empires, the Khshung-Nu could move entire cities of felt tents at a moment's notice, shifting trade routes as easily as they redirected rivers. Chinese chroniclers, both awed and terrified, described their capital as a mobile palace where envoys from Persia and India bartered alongside tribal chieftains. The Han dynasty's records reveal a startling truth. The Khshung-Nu weren't just raiders, they were diplomats. When negotiations broke down, they didn't just attack, they embargoed. One particularly audacious Chanyu demanded a Han princess as tribute, along with annual shipments of grain and wine. In return, a promise not to raid. It was protection money on an imperial scale, and it worked for a while. The Han emperors, humiliated but pragmatic, even minted special tribute coins to fund these payoffs, a stark admission that gold sometimes bought more security than soldiers. Yet the Khshung-Nu's greatest legacy might be what they didn't build. They left no cities, no monuments, just endless rolling graves marked by stone stelae. Their language survives only in Chinese transcripts, their culture pieced together from the very enemies who feared them. But look closer, that confederation model. It became Genghis Khan's blueprint. Their horse-borne trade networks, they laid the groundwork for the Silk Road's northern routes. Even their tactics feigned retreats. Lightning raids echo through Mongol conquest centuries later. The mystery isn't why the Khshung-Nu faded internal strife and Han counterattacks fractured their union, but why we remember the Silk Road as Chinese at all. Perhaps it's because history favors the scribes over the nomads, the wall builders over those who made walls obsolete. The Khshung-Nu remind us that trade isn't just about caravans and bazaars. It's about power, pressure, and the unbreakable truth that even the mightiest empire must sometimes bargain with the wind. Perched on sheer Andean cliffs, where mist coils like living tendrils around stone ruins, the Chachapoya carved their cities into the very clouds that gave them their name, the warriors of the clouds. While the Inca would later paint them as fierce rivals, these enigmatic people were master traders long before conquest reshaped their story. Imagine their mountaintop strongholds like Kailap, its massive stone walls towering over the Utcubamba Valley, where merchants haggled over bundles of coca leaves so potent they became currency, and quetzal feathers so vibrant they shimmered like captured rainbows. This wasn't just commerce, it was a high-altitude ballet of exchange, connecting Amazonian tribes with coastal cultures through a network of vertiginous trails no wider than a goat's path. The Chachapoya's genius lay in turning isolation into advantage. Their cliffside cities, accessible only by rope bridges swaying over dizzying drops, doubled as natural fortresses and trade depots. A caravan arriving from the lowlands might bring hallucinogenic ayahuasca vines and jaguar pelts, while highland traders offered freeze-dried potatoes and spun alpaca wool. But their most coveted export was their shamans' knowledge rituals, blending jungle plant lore with mountain cosmology, whispered across the Andes like secrets passed hand to hand. Archaeologists have unearthed proof of this spiritual commerce. Snuff trays carved from whalebone washed ashore hundreds of miles away, and shells from Ecuador's coast, all carefully placed in tombs as if to equip the dead for journeys between worlds. Then came the Inca, desperate to control the Chachapoya's strategic position between jungle and highlands. The empire launched decades of brutal campaigns. Even after conquest, the Cloud Warriors resisted, allying with Spanish invaders in a doomed bid for freedom, only to be decimated by European diseases. But their legacy didn't vanish. It's preserved in their mummies, bundled in crouched positions and wrapped in layers of textiles that map their trade connections through dyes and patterns. Some mummies wear headdresses adorned with feathers from birds found only in the Amazon, while others clutch pouches of seashells from the Pacific. These weren't just burials, they were frozen moments of a living trade network, each thread a testament to connections spanning ecosystems. What makes the Chachapoya truly haunting is how much remains undiscovered. In 2016, drones revealed a sprawling necropolis at Lapita, its cliff-faced tombs untouched for centuries. Nearby, the ruins of Grand Pagetane hide beneath moss and bromeliads, its circular buildings adorned with carvings of celestial serpents, a style unlike anything else in the Andes. Every new discovery hints at a deeper truth, that the Cloud Warriors weren't just traders but cultural alchemists, blending Amazonian, coastal, and highland traditions into something entirely their own. Their story forces us to ask, how many other Andean civilizations, equally complex and interconnected, still wait beneath the roots of strangler figs or the slow creep of mountain mist? The answer might rewrite our understanding of the ancient Americas, one cliffside tomb at a time. The Guti stormed into Mesopotamia like a sandstorm, swift, brutal, and impossible to ignore. In the 22nd century before the Common Era, these enigmatic highlanders descended from the Zagros Mountains, toppling the mighty Akkadian Empire that had dominated Sumer for generations. Ancient scribes, perhaps nursing wounded pride, dismissed them as dragons of the mountains and barbarians who knew no right from wrong. But buried beneath those biased accounts lies a fascinating truth. The Guti didn't just plunder Mesopotamia's wealth. they rewrote its economic playbook, leaving fingerprints on trade networks that outlasted their brief, turbulent reign. What made the Guti so disruptive wasn't just their military prowess, though their mastery of hit-and-run tactics crippled Akkadian supply lines, but their intimate knowledge of metals. Hailing from mineral-rich highlands, they brought advanced metallurgical techniques into the heart of Sumer. Suddenly, bronze tools and weapons traded along the Tigris and Euphrates bore unfamiliar alloys, their composition traced back to Guti-controlled mines. Even more intriguing, cuneiform tablets from this era reveal a curious shift. Merchant guilds once loyal to Akkadian elites began paying tolls to Guti chieftains, suggesting these so-called barbarians understood the value of controlled commerce. A receipt from details a shipment of lapis lazuli, previously a royal monopoly, now taxed by a Guti official named Indushu, proof that trade didn't stop under their rule, it adapted. Yet the Guti's greatest legacy might be their impermanence. Within a century, they were gone, overthrown by a resurgent Sumerian dynasty that erased most traces of their influence. Their language, sparsely recorded in administrative texts, remains untranslated. Their gods, once imposed on Mesopotamian temples, vanished from prayers. But subtle clues endure. Archaeologists have uncovered workshops in former Guti-occupied cities where metallurgists experimented with new tin-to-copper ratios, a technical leap that later fueled Babylon's bronze industry. Even their administrative innovations, decentralized toll stations and standardized weight systems, resurfaced in later empires. The real mystery isn't why the Guti fell, but why modern historians still dismiss them as a footnote. Perhaps it's because they left no grand monuments or epic poetry, only broken tablets lamenting their dark reign. But consider this, in destabilizing Akkad's rigid trade hierarchies, they inadvertently created space for Sumerian city-states like to rise as independent mercantile powers. Those chaotic decades of Guti rule may have seeded the very conditions that made Mesopotamia's later golden age possible. Sometimes, the most transformative civilizations aren't those that build empires, but those that shake foundations, leaving others to rebuild atop the cracks. While the Aztecs carved their empire across central Mexico, another civilization rose in the western highlands, one so formidable it became the only Mesoamerican power the Aztecs never conquered. The Tarascans, known in their own language as the Purepecha, built a kingdom where copper wasn't just a metal, it was the backbone of an economic system that rivaled Tenochtitlan's. Picture their capital, Tizintzatzin, its pyramid-like yakartas overlooking Lake Pátzcuaro, where canoe loads of copper ore arrived from mines in the mountains, to be smelted into axes, needles, and ceremonial bells in state-run workshops. This wasn't just craftsmanship, it was proto-industrialization, centuries before Europe's factories. What set the Tarascans apart wasn't just their metallurgical prowess. Though their copper tools were so superior, even Aztec merchants smuggled them, but their bureaucratic brilliance. They organized their realm into a tightly controlled network of specialized towns, one for fishing, another for obsidian blades, a third for featherwork. Taxes were paid not in goods, but in labor days, a system eerily similar to modern public works projects. Their trade routes stretched from the Pacific coast, where they sourced seashells, to the northern deserts for turquoise, creating a self-sufficient economy that needed nothing from their Aztec rivals. When Moctezuma sent ambassadors demanding tribute, the Tarascan king reportedly sent back a basket of fruit with live scorpions hidden beneath. The message was clear: we don't negotiate. The Aztecs' own records hint at grudging respect. Codices depict Tarascan warriors armed with copper-tipped macuahuitls, wooden swords lined with razor-sharp metal flakes, instead of the usual obsidian capable of cleaving through armor. Yet the Tarascans' real innovation was naval. On Lake Pátzcuaro, they deployed entire fleets of war canoes to repel Aztec incursions, a tactic the landlocked Tenochtitlan couldn't counter. Archaeologists have found underwater fortifications, submerged palisades designed to trap enemy vessels, proof of a martial creativity that matched their economic ingenuity. Had Cortés arrived a century later, history might remember the Tarascans as Mesoamerica's dominant power. Their kingdom was younger than the Aztec Empire but growing faster, with a centralized economy that could have scaled exponentially. Spanish chroniclers noted their advanced metallurgy with awe. One priest described furnaces capable of casting bronze, a technology Europe had only recently rediscovered. But the same geography that protected them, those rugged highlands and lakes, also isolated them. When smallpox ripped through Mexico in the 1520s, the Tarascans surrendered without a major battle, their immunity shattered like so many others. The tragedy of Tzitzit isn't just its ruins, it's the roads not taken. Modern metallurgists confirm Tarascan copper alloys were nearing the composition needed for true bronze, a leap that might have sparked an industrial revolution in the Americas. Their labor tribute system could have evolved into something resembling a welfare state. Instead, their legacy survives in quieter ways. The butterfly fishermen of Pátzcuaro still use techniques perfected by Tarascan engineers, and the region's copper mines remain productive today. The Tarascans remind us that history's what-ifs aren't just fantasies, they're glimpses of alternate paths severed by chance and time. Their story isn't about defeat, but about the fleeting nature of potential, and how civilizations on the brink of transformation can vanish before the world sees what they might have become. The windswept steppes of Central Asia have witnessed countless empires rise and fall, but few transformations are as astonishing as that of the Yuezhi, a people who turned defeat into opportunity, exile into empire. Originally pastoral nomads grazing their herds in what's now Western China, their fate changed overnight when the Khshung-Nu, those relentless horseback warlords, crushed their confederation in the 2nd century before the Common Era. Forced to abandon their ancestral lands, the Yuezhi embarked on a westward exodus that would inadvertently stitch together the ancient world's greatest economies. What began as a desperate flight became one of history's most remarkable reinventions, the birth of the Khshung Empire, a civilization that didn't just connect Rome and China, it became the indispensable middleman between them. Picture the caravan routes snaking through the Hindu Kush, where Yuezhi traders, now settled in Bactria, adapted with breathtaking agility. Once herders, they mastered the art of the deal, brokering deals between Chinese silk producers and Parthian middlemen. Their coins, struck with Greek, Persian, and Hindu motifs, tell the story of their cultural chameleonism. A single Khshung drachma might bear the image of the Buddha on one side and the Zoroastrian fire god Ahura Mazda on the other, a monetary diplomacy designed to reassure every trading partner. These weren't just tokens of wealth, they were portable propaganda proclaiming, "We speak your language, we honor your gods, now let's do business." The sheer reach of their network still stuns archaeologists. A hoard of Khshung coins unearthed near Hanoi suggests their merchants ventured far beyond the Silk Road's traditional bounds, while Roman glassware excavated in Bagram, Afghanistan, reveals their role as global wholesalers. But their true genius lay in synthesis. When Buddhism began drifting north from India, the Khshungs didn't just adopt it. They monetized it, commissioning the first ever human images of the Buddha, previously represented only by symbols, to appeal to Greek-influenced taste. The Gandharan art that resulted, with its wavy-haired Buddhas draped in toga-like robes, became a hot commodity from Mathura to Alexandria. What's often overlooked is how their refugee origins shaped their strategy. Unlike sedentary empires, the Yuezhi turned, Kshungs retained a nomad's knack for reading landscapes, not just geographical, but economic. When political unrest choked the traditional Silk Road, they pioneered alternate routes through the Karakoram. When Roman demand for silk spiked, they cultivated direct ties with Han officials, bypassing Parthian middlemen. Even their capital, Purashapura, was deliberately positioned at the crossroads of monsoon and overland trade, a hub where Indian spices met Siberian furs. Their decline, when it came, was as multifaceted as their rise. Sasanian pressure from the west, combined with the Han dynasty's collapse, severed their lifelines. Yet their legacy lingers in the most unexpected places, the blend of Hellenistic and Indian art they popularized, the Buddhist texts they translated into countless languages, even the merchant guild systems later adopted by the Byzantines. The Yuezhi prove a provocative truth. Sometimes the greatest civilizations aren't those that stand their ground, but those that adapt to the storm's path, weaving new connections from the threads of their own displacement. Their story isn't about loss, it's about the alchemy of resilience, how a people with nothing left to lose can rewrite the rules of the world. The echoes of these vanished trade networks aren't just whispers from the past, they're urgent lessons written in the ruins of Petra's water channels, the silt-clogged docks of Lothal, and the abandoned granaries of the Wari. What these 25 civilizations understood, and what we're only now rediscovering, is that trade wasn't merely about moving goods, it was the circulatory system of human progress. Take the Indus Valley's standardized weights, a Bronze Age precursor to modern quality control, or the Phoenician alphabet, born from the chaos of multilingual marketplaces, and now the foundation of half the world's scripts. Every time we swipe a credit card or track a shipment on our phones, we're unknowingly channeling innovations these ancient traders pioneered. But their collapses reveal an even starker truth: interconnectedness breeds fragility. The Oxus civilization's sudden demise didn't just starve its own cities, it triggered bronze shortages from Mesopotamia to the Mediterranean, a domino effect eerily reminiscent of today's semiconductor crises. The Khmer Empire's over-engineered water network, designed to defy monsoons, became its Achilles heel when rains faltered, a warning for modern megacities banking on predictable climates. Even the humble potato, once traded by the ancestral Pueblones as insurance against drought, reminds us how monocultures and over-reliance on single commodities can spell disaster. These weren't isolated failures, they were stress tests of systems stretched too thin. Yet buried in their rubble are blueprints for resilience. The Garamontes Fagaras, those ancient underground canals, inspired modern Qatar's solar-powered irrigation, proving that pre-industrial tech can still solve postmodern problems. The Tarona's reciprocity-based trade, where objects carried spiritual weight beyond their material value, mirrors today's growing barter economies and local exchange networks. And the Lapita's celestial navigation, honed over generations of open ocean voyages, is now being revived by Pacific Islanders to combat rising sea levels, proof that traditional knowledge can outlast empires. Perhaps most strikingly, these civilizations challenge our obsession with growth. The Norte Chico thrived for centuries without pottery or weapons, prioritizing social bonds over stockpiles. The Minones flourished not through conquest, but by turning the Mediterranean into a shared marketplace until a single volcanic winter exposed the fragility of their web. Their stories force us to ask, is our globalized world a network or a house of cards? When the next crisis hits, be it drought, pandemic, or financial collapse, will we have the wisdom of the Sogdians, who diversified their routes, or the hubris of the Khmer, who bet everything on one perfect system? The answer might lie in a paradox these ancient traders understood instinctively. true resilience isn't about building higher walls or hoarding more resources. It's about weaving threads so strong that even when some snap, the fabric holds. As climate change redraws coastlines and AI reshapes labor, their forgotten strategies, decentralized systems, cultural adaptability, and a reverence for balance feel less like archaeology and more like a survival manual. The final lesson these lost networks offer isn't just about how civilizations fall, but how they might endure. In their ruins, we find not just warnings, but a road map written in trade routes, not treaties, for navigating an uncertain future. From the bustling ports of Dilmun to the wind-swept caravan routes of the Ueji, these lost civilizations didn't just participate in trade. They reinvented it, turning deserts into highways and oceans into bridges long before globalization became a modern buzzword. Their legacies linger in the most unexpected places. The standardized weights we use today trace back to Harappan marketplaces, while the concept of maritime insurance owes its roots to Phoenician merchants braving stormy seas. Even the humble cacao bean, once traded by Olmec middlemen, now fuels a multi-billion-dollar chocolate industry. These weren't isolated exchanges. They were the first stitches in the vast tapestry of human connection, proving that commerce has always been about more than goods. It's about the ideas, technologies, and cultures that hitch a ride alongside them. What's truly humbling is how these networks collapsed. The Oxus civilization's disappearance triggered bronze shortages across continents, while the Khmer Empire's over-engineered waterworks failed when the rains strayed from their script. These weren't just local tragedies, they were early warnings about the fragility of interdependent systems, yet within their ruins lie blueprints for resilience. The Garamonte's underground canals inspire modern desert agriculture, and the Lapita's celestial navigation is now revived by Pacific islanders facing rising seas. Their solutions whisper across time: adaptability, diversification, and respect for ecological limits aren't new ideas, they're ancient survival strategies we're only now relearning. So which of these forgotten traders speaks to you? Is it the Minones who turned the Mediterranean into a shared marketplace, or the Sogdians whose multilingual contracts foreshadowed modern finance? Perhaps it's the ancestral Pueblones whose turquoise for feathers trade defied a brutal landscape, or the Tarona who wove spirituality into every exchange. Their stories remind us that history isn't just about kings and conquests, it's about the unsung merchants, artisans, and navigators who quietly knit the world together. Hit pause and let me know your favorite in the comments. I read every one. And if you've enjoyed this journey through the back alleys of ancient commerce, don't forget to subscribe. Who knows which lost civilization we'll uncover next? Until then, keep looking beyond the textbooks. The past is full of surprises, and the next rewrite of history might just start.